Hello devs, Sid the IT guy here, and this is a summary video about the Shopify app usage based subscription API that I covered on my live stream today. And this example is built on NodeJS and Shopify GraphQL API. So shout out to my regular viewers, for Syed and Farhan. They stuck with me throughout the entire thing today. So next time, if you as a viewer are around the same time that I am live streaming, which is around 3 to 5 p.m. Indian time on weekends, please consider stopping by and say hi or engage in some fun banter with me. I would appreciate it. So with that out of the way, let's dive into the code. Okay, so I did some changes to the application after the live stream ended. So I will take you through those as well. So if you end up watching the 2.5 hour live stream that I did today, you will not feel left out. So in server.js, where we start the Node.js application server, I created two files called function and requests, which I will treat it as traits, the same way I treated traits in Laravel. So constant function trait equals this require and request trait is this require, and I pass these two inside one JSON object to auth.js, which is responsible for all the API routing inside the Express.js application that I wrote here. So in function trait and request trait, it contains the same looking functions that used to be in my Laravel app. So functions.js, you can pause the video here if you want to read this code out. And 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's continue. So the API version is taken from the env file that is separately created for the Express.js application. And this is how the signature of Shopify APIs are. So this is return. And the next function is the Shopify API headers, which works the same way. It returns a simple JSON object for content type application JSON and X Shopify access token, store.access token. This is coming from the database, where I have set up the database this way, that users table is the Laravel users default table, and all other tables in here are basically the default tables that Laravel installation provides you. So every user in the users table has a mapping with Shopify stores using a pivot of user stores table. So in here we have store ID and user ID, and this store ID maps out to Shopify stores table, which has the table ID 1. So this is how a pivot table is used to map a Laravel user entry to a Shopify store table entry. So we can identify which user is mapped to which Shopify store. Okay. So after that, in server.js, these two things are passed into auth.js, which is basically where the API routing is done. So in auth.js, you can see this function API auth, which is basically making sure that request headers have the authorization header in them. And based on that, it will return whether it is an authenticated request or not, using the JWT verify function. So then this API route prefix is done, because if tomorrow, if we want to do versioning with these APIs, I can just do API/v1 or API/v2 or something like that. So that is why this is done. And all of these routes have this API route prefix in them. So setup, usage, billing, and create action on billing are the two APIs that we are interested in this video. So basically, for the Shopify GraphQL API for app usage subscription pricing model, you would have to be aware of two GraphQL mutations. The first mutation is app subscription create. So I recommend that you go through the Shopify documentation. So basically, yeah, it's here. This is the documentation for Shopify where you can read about it, create a usage based subscription. And the first thing that they give here, the app subscription create, is basically this whole mutation copied and pasted into this thing here, and I have changed the return URL and live stream app pricing plan. Basically, this is the name of it. So the return URL here is kind of important because this should map out to the internal endpoint of your application that you are building. In the line items plan object, you can have a app usage pricing details mutation, which will determine how you are going to build the merchant and based on what you are going to build them. So the terms attribute here is saying $1 for one action. So an action can be anything. So let's assume that you will charge the Shopify merchant $30 for every 5,000 invoices generated. So that's what you will put here. And this will show up in the merchant's screen when they are about to approve the charge. So they are aware of what money they are about to pay you for the actions that they carry out. So that's what the terms is. And capped amount is a necessary parameter that you would have to pass in, because that will prevent the store merchant from spending a bit too much money. So if there is no cap, then they can just keep spending money throughout the month, and that is obviously bad for the business. So this is what prevents it. So currency code USD and amount 100. So basically what this says is for every month, the merchant should not be able to spend more than $100, or you can change that according to your requirement. And down here we have user errors, which is in the return type, and the confirmation URL. The confirmation URL is an important one, because when this API runs, the Shopify API will give you a URL that you would have to read and redirect the merchant to. So inside the Shopify ecosystem, they can see a dedicated billing page which will show them the details of the pricing, and they can choose to approve it or cancel it. Now depending on whether they cancel or approve it, you will carry out the actions accordingly. But we will assume that they will always approve it, for this example at least. Then the app subscription object will be returned, which will have an ID and line items in it. And I would assume that you would use this return type to store in database, so you can have a record of it. Down here, then we have a payload variable, which is an object with key query, and inside that mutation is passed, which is this variable. So then the result variable contains the API call response that is defined in the request trait. So in request.js, inside the traits folder, you can see this function, make an API call to Shopify. So basically this only requires the Axios library. I just picked Axios because it is simple to work with. So then we do await Axios post, endpoint, payload and headers is passed. Right now the method parameter is unused because we only have post request going on into the app. When it will be get, I will modify this function. And then status true and rest.data is returned here. Otherwise, these things happen where status is false and accordingly it is handled. Okay. So you can pause the video if you want to read the code out, and let's move on. So in dashboard controller, then the JSON is returned as it is, and this is how it looks like. So inside Postman, when you call this setup app usage billing API route, this is the response pattern that you will see. The top having status true, then REST body having the data, and inside that app subscription create object is there, and it has a confirmation URL. Now this confirmation URL is basically what you will use to redirect the merchant to. Actually, let me run it one more time. So we have a new URL right now. Copy this and I will run it in my browser. So this is what it looks like to the store merchant. They will get redirected to a dedicated billing page, and it says you will not be billed for this test charge, because while creating this mutation, I passed in test true, which is right here. So you can do it for your partner application. So it will enable you to use it as much as you want. So here you can see additional information and terms. So it says $1 for one action, which is basically what we passed in the mutation, and the merchant can approve it. When they approve it, then they will be redirected to a return URL that we provided. In my case, it is google.com because I wanted to keep it simple. But in your case, you would put a specialized endpoint that you would use to capture the information that you will receive from this. Basically just a specialized endpoint that will point to your application that may show a thank you page or something like that. So then we will approve it and we will go to google.com. So basically this is what I set up. Okay. So this is one part of the API. The second part of the API is create action on billing. So this API is used to charge the merchant based on the action that they have taken out. So you would have some validation in your backend, like, okay, $30 for 5,000 invoices. So you would check if 5,000 invoices have been generated. So you would call this API to charge $30 on the merchant's credit card. So this is what happens here. Yeah, so user is taken, then the store is taken, and endpoint is GraphQL JSON one more time. Headers is taken as usual. The mutation is app usage record create. So this is the mutation that we are using on the GraphQL API. So this can be carried out. So this has to have a line item ID. Now where would you get the line item ID, which is in the previous API call? Inside this line items array, the first index having the ID key. So this Shopify app subscription line item object that we have right here, this is the string that you would have to save in your database, and you would have to pass it in when you would create an action. So that's what I have passed in here. Above, if I show you, then the line item ID is like this. Anyway, so then you describe it, app charge from Express.js API. I have put it as example. It's not a big deal. And then you mention the price of it. So I have put $10 and USD, of course. So basically it is hard coded price, but you can make it dynamic according to your requirement. So then we have the same thing, payload query mutation, and then we call Shopify with post request, and at the end we just return the result. And on Postman, this is how it would look like. So create action on billing route is up here, and there is no request body that I'm sending in it. So I'm just getting this response where it says status true, and RESP body contains an app usage record create object, and inside that app usage record is there, and inside that an ID is there. So you will take this ID and you would save it in your database, so you can have a record that, okay, on this day, on this time, we charge the merchant on this pricing, or something like that, that you can put in your database. And if this doesn't work, then error message is returned. So basically, just let me take you through the MySQL API JS. So this is the function get Shopify store data that is getting called here in the second line of getting the store. So basically, this how this is carried out right now is user stores is queried with user ID, and depending on the last row is taken, and that store ID is then queried with Shopify stores model to get the store data, and the access token will be used to make the authenticated API calls. So this is the setup of setup and action create on the Shopify app usage based subscription APIs. I hope you enjoyed the video. Okay, so I'm wrapping up the video here. Thank you to my Patreon supporters who have been supporting the channel so far. And if you can support me on Patreon, please do. It would mean a lot to me. And if you want the code base access for this repository, reach out to me via email or Discord server. We can work something out. And I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.